The storm had moved across the Pacific like a living wall of static, turning the sky above the horizon array into a vault of restless color. Lightning crawled along the upper atmosphere, not in white forks, but in ultraviolet veils, silent and enormous. Beneath that alien shimmer, the array's kilometer-wide ring of superconductive pylons hummed at a frequency too low for human ears, a pulse that made the soil vibrate like a drum stretched across the skin of the planet. Every console in the control hall blinked amber as the core field came online. Beyond reinforced glass, a singularity containment column flickered into visibility, a column of bent light, like air seen through fire. Dr. Alara Kincaid stood in front of it, jaw tight, eyes bloodshot, the fatigue of 43 sleepless hours written across her face. She had chased this moment for half her life. Quantum crossphase resonance, a controlled interface between probability membranes. For years it had been dismissed as theory, a mathematician's fever dream. But the data from the lunar neutrino intercepts, the anomalous entanglement echoes from the Dyson debris near Neptune, those had rewritten everything. What they had built here was no mere experiment. It was a doorway, if her equations held. He means to see the architecture beneath reality. The others in the control hall, 50 engineers, analysts, and soldiers, were just beginning to realize the scale of what they were about to attempt. Colonel Rhys Arden watched the containment feed with the detached calm of a man who had seen too many prototypes detonate. He was military liaison to the Horizon Initiative, seconded from Strategic Command after the incident in Jakarta when an uncontrolled microfold had swallowed 4 city blocks into a pocket of null pressure. His job was simple on paper: ensure the array didn't kill the planet. He trusted no one, least of all the scientists. But Kincaid, for all her arrogance, carried something rare: conviction forged from loss. Arden had read her file. Husband dead in the Cascade collapse. Her research once shuddered for ethical violations involving unauthorized cognitive mapping of AI heuristics. Yet she'd clawed her way back, rebuilt credibility, and somehow persuaded the Global Accord to fund her again. The ignition sequence counted down, 8 minutes to full phase alignment. Alara's voice cut through the hum, steady despite the fatigue. Initiating lattice polarization, core temperature within tolerance. We're holding at 9 megakelvins. A technician confirmed through the internal feed that the field dampers were stable. In the outer periphery, magnetic cranes positioned the auxiliary fusion stacks, bleeding excess plasma into containment. To anyone watching from orbit, the array would have appeared like a ring of molten glass. Outside, along the perimeter ridge, Captain Mira Solano guided her recon drones across the coastal plateau. She was the array's security commander, former carrier pilot turned ground specialist after a near-fatal ejection over the Arctic frontier. Her drones skimmed through the mist, sensors tuned for any sign of intrusion. The project was supposed to be invisible, buried beneath false geospatial markers, but Mira knew better. Nothing that cost this much stayed secret for long. 2 nights ago, her satellites had picked up something. Heat signatures from low-orbit kinetic relays that didn't belong to any registered nation. She sent a coded ping to Arden inside. Unregistered orbital objects, vectoring high-latitude approach. Speed suggests glide insertion. Possible stealth delivery. Arden's eyes narrowed. The General Assembly had sworn the initiative would remain demilitarized, but someone was moving assets into range. Stay dark, he ordered. Confirm trajectory. If they drop, we intercept before they reach grid 0. Mira adjusted her visor, switching to spectral overlay. The objects flared briefly against the Black Sea, then vanished again. Heat blew minimal, descent angle shallow. Whoever they were, they understood stealth. She recalled the Jakarta aftermath, the ghost war between superpowers over ownership of the singularity tech, and felt that same cold twist in her gut. Horizon wasn't just science. It was a weapon waiting for whoever could tame it first. Inside, the countdown reached 3 minutes. Alara adjusted the phase coupler by hand, overriding the AI's safety lockouts. The AI's predictive model is flattening out, warned her assistant. Probability density collapse in the outer shell. She didn't flinch. That's the point. We're forcing coherence across the boundary. The assistant hesitated, but obeyed. The containment column shimmered brighter, light bending in impossible geometries. Rhys Arden approached, voice low. You override again, and I shut it down. We don't even know what's on the other side. Alara didn't look away from the column. There is no side, Colonel. Just layers. We're one waveform in a stack of countless others. He almost laughed. If this goes wrong, you'll vaporize half the Pacific waveform. She met his eyes. If we do nothing, we'll never understand what already killed our predecessors. A tremor shook the floor. Mira's voice came through the comm grid, sharp now. Contact confirmed. 4 kinetic pods breaching the troposphere. Impact vector, directly above the array. Arden swore and hit the emergency interlink. Evacuation code Indigo. All non-essential personnel clear the core chamber. Red strobes lit the hall as techs scrambled. Alara refused to move. We can't abort mid-sequence. The containment would collapse. Arden grabbed her shoulder. Then stabilize it remotely. We've got incoming ordnance. Above the cloud cover, the pods split open like seeds, releasing clusters of glider drones with mirrored skins that refracted radar. They dove toward the array, engines whispering on ionized air. Mira's perimeter turrets came alive, tracking signatures, launching hypervelocity flechettes that carved through 3 of the drones before they reached the inner field. The survivors scattered, deploying jammers that filled the air with white noise and static bursts across every frequency. Mira switched to line-of-sight targeting, sweat tracing the curve of her neck inside the helmet. The 4th drone fired a single lance of blue light, an electromagnetic pulse tuned to disable superconductive relays. Inside, the lights flickered. The containment column flared white. Systems screamed warnings, magnetic confinement dropping, energy feedback rising. Alara's hands flew across the console. Compensate with manual lattice injection, she shouted to no one in particular. She rerouted coolant flow, sacrificing the auxiliary reactor to stabilize the field. For an instant, the column stabilized, then split like a mirror under stress. What appeared wasn't an explosion. It was an absence. A sphere of perfect darkness hung above the platform, edges rippling as though reality itself were refusing to acknowledge its shape. Around it, instruments went blind. Time seemed to smear. The nearest technician took 1 step too close and vanished, his outline folding inward. Alara stared, paralyzed by both terror and triumph. "It's a fold," she whispered. "A direct bridge across decoherent space." Arden pulled her back. "Shut it down!" She shook her head. "We can't. It's self-sustaining now." The sphere pulsed once, and every screen in the hall filled with cascading data, patterns of symbols and waveform echoes no one could interpret. But Alara saw meaning there, impossible yet familiar. The multiverse wasn't theory anymore. It was talking back. Outside, Mira's last drone captured footage as the drones disintegrated midair, consumed by gravitational shear. She stared at the feed, realizing the sky itself had bent inward over the array, like a funnel of glass drawing light toward that impossible center. The atmosphere distorted, winds screaming as if pulled by an invisible tide. In the command hall, Arden barked for containment units, emergency seals, evacuation vectors. Alara stood frozen, watching data flood the network faster than any system could log it. The equations weren't random. They mirrored her own earlier models, but mirrored again, inverted, recursive. Each pulse of the fold corresponded to an event across distant coordinates, signals echoing from elsewhere, other realities vibrating in sympathetic resonance. Then the fold flickered, and something stepped through. It wasn't solid in any conventional sense, more an interference pattern shaped like a man, composed of overlapping silhouettes that refused to synchronize. It looked around as if confused, each motion leaving ghostly afterimages. Alara's mind recoiled, yet a strange familiarity struck her. Its waveform matched the signatures she had predicted months ago. "It's a phase echo," she breathed. A consciousness bleed from an adjacent manifold. Arden aimed his sidearm by reflex, though he knew bullets meant nothing to energy. The entity turned toward them, voice emerging as layered harmonics that vibrated bones. "Stop the resonance," it said, though the words arrived fragmented, as if translated through distortion. "The bridge is unstable. You are breaking continuity." Alara's mouth went dry. "You understand us?" The figure shuddered, then splintered into streams of light. The containment alarm screamed again. The fold expanded, devouring consoles. Mira's voice crackled through the comm grid, broken by interference. "Core field expanding. Radiation spike. Get out now." Arden shoved Alara toward the exit. They ran as the floor cracked beneath them, molten metal bleeding through fissures. The sphere grew, swallowing the chamber's ceiling, and through its surface, Alara glimpsed other landscapes flickering, cities that weren't theirs, skies lit by unfamiliar constellations. Every frame a different version of Earth. Outside, the array's ring lit up in concentric waves. Mira watched as each pylon overloaded, one after another, vaporizing into plumes of ionized dust. The field reached critical. She dived behind her armored vehicle as the horizon inverted, sea lifting upward in a wall of liquid light. For 3 seconds, the world seemed to fold inward, and then it all snapped back. Silence. Smoke. The ring was gone. At its center, only a crater rimmed with fused glass, glowing faintly blue. Communication channels were dead. Mira staggered up, scanning with manual optics. No movement. No signal from command. Then, faintly, a transmission ghosted through the static. Alara's voice, barely audible, whispering coordinates in a single phrase. It worked. Hours later, rescue teams scoured the ruins. They found fragments of the array's outer shell buried deep beneath vitrified stone. No trace of Kincaid or Arden. Yet readings from orbital sensors showed something impossible. A pulse echo repeating at precise intervals like a heartbeat. Each echo slightly offset in frequency, as if synchronized across multiple realities. In the debriefing room aboard the carrier Ares Dawn, Mira watched the telemetry with hollow eyes. She had seen death before, but this was different. The data suggested continuity beyond the singularity. Survivors trapped between folds or something pretending to be them. The brass wanted to classify it, bury it like every other anomaly. But Mira had heard Alara's last words, the way her voice carried certainty even through distortion. It worked. In a dim observation bay, the carrier's AI reconstructed partial footage recovered from the array's network buffer. The last frame showed Alara standing before the collapsing fold, her hand raised as if touching its surface. Behind her, the distorted figure extended a mirrored hand. Their silhouettes merged for an instant, then dissolved into the brightness. The file ended there. Outside the ship, auroras shimmered across the sky in patterns unseen before, fractals repeating endlessly like fingerprints of parallel worlds. Scientists called it atmospheric ionization. Mira called it a message. Somewhere beyond the threshold, Alara Kincaid had opened a door, and something, or someone, had stepped through. As the Aries dawn drifted over the Pacific, new energy signatures flickered across its sensors, points of light appearing and vanishing in perfect sequence. Rhys Arden's name appeared among the dead, but a voice crackled faintly through encrypted channels bearing his clearance code. "Do not attempt reactivation," it said. "The bridge is alive." Mira stared at the message, her reflection ghosting in the glass. She realized then that the experiment had not failed. It had merely changed the definition of reality, and as the sky above shimmered with ultraviolet veins once more, the world braced for whatever would emerge next from the code of the multiverse. The aftermath of the Horizon Array incident had left the Pacific coast a cratered wasteland of fused metal and scorched earth. Satellite imagery showed molten rings etched into the coastline, the patterns radiating outward like the fingerprint of a giant's palm. On the carrier Aries Dawn, Commander Mira Solano stared at the telemetry grids with a sense of hollow urgency. Every echo pulse from the collapsed fold now represented a potential threat, an unstable conduit to realities they had no understanding of, a door that might allow anything, human, machine, or worse, to step through. Alara Kincaid's status remained unknown. Rhys Arden had vanished alongside her, leaving only fractured communication bursts that had transmitted cryptic coordinates and warnings. Analysts argued over the significance of each pulse. Some suggested the fold had stabilized itself in a form of quasi-conscious feedback. Others whispered that it was actively hunting for compatible observers. Mira didn't care for theory. She had survived the field collapse. She knew instinctively that the multiverse they had opened was already reaching out. Logistics teams were the first to reveal the scale of the disaster. Supplies, meant for 6 months of post-activation research, had been vaporized or fused into the crater. Emergency fuel convoys could only reach the carrier by careful orbital relay. Every decision became a calculus of attrition. Rationed energy to maintain orbital lift, drones diverted for reconnaissance instead of perimeter security, engineers working on emergency phase sensors with hands blistered from high-energy residuals. Every system was operating at the edge of capacity, and every misstep would cost lives. Mira had begun deploying reconnaissance drones over the crater zone. Optical feeds were distorted by residual quantum interference, sensors reading impossible flux patterns, radiation spikes that violated known physics. Yet, hidden in the noise, she detected repetition, a rhythm almost musical. When she overlaid it with the last data logs from the array, she realized it corresponded to the fold's final collapse sequence, as though the structure were attempting self-repair across fractured probability membranes. It wasn't just residual energy. It was adaptive. In the meantime, political pressure had intensified. Global Command insisted on containment protocols, yet military advisors demanded offensive measures. The threat of a breach into other realities could not be ignored. Arden, when he returned via intermittent communications burst, argued pragmatically. "We need field teams on site. We cannot let the fold expand unchecked. Every second we delay, the system adapts." His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the cost of hesitation in Jakarta, and Mira respected it, even as she bristled at his authoritarian tone. Alara's absence forced the team to improvise. Dr. Soren Patel, a young theoretical physicist, was brought in to fill the analytical void. He worked feverishly, translating incomplete data into models that suggested how the fold propagated. His mind operated in fractals. Each thought branched into contingencies, yet he lacked field experience, and his equations often failed under the chaotic influence of environmental noise. Mira and her tactical teams were forced to marry theory and practice, improvising drones and field suits with adaptive shielding that could withstand quantum fluctuation spikes. The first field operation began as a reconnaissance sweep into the outer crater rim. Drone swarms were deployed with layered AI scripts to adjust their flight paths in real time, avoiding zones where quantum interference created sudden vacuum pockets or intense gravitational gradients. They transmitted streams of incomplete imagery, walls folding in on themselves, rivers of molten metal suspended midair, fragments of the coastline that appeared duplicated, overlaid, and offset. Each visual anomaly carried the haunting possibility of other observers, parallel Kincaids or Arden equivalents, existing simultaneously in overlapping space. The sweep was interrupted by movement, silhouettes emerging from one of the probability folds. They were humanoid in shape, but blurred, constantly phasing in and out of solid form. The drones faltered, systems overheating as feedback loops attempted to process the anomaly. Mira watched through augmented optics as the phasing figures approached the perimeter. Shiki ordered drones to maintain distance, deploying microprojectiles designed to disrupt energy coherence without obliterating matter. Some of the figures recoiled, some vanished. One figure lingered, scanning, and a faint waveform registered across the sensors. Human neural patterns, familiar but distorted. Patel hypothesized these were echoes of consciousness pulled from alternate timelines, attracted to the fold's stabilization attempts. It was proof that the multiverse code was active, adaptive, and capable of interacting with human cognition. Mira's gut, honed over decades of operational stress, told her this was not a benign phenomenon. Echoes could learn, strategize, and even manipulate probability fields to achieve outcomes beyond conventional tactics. As reconnaissance continued, a new complication arose. Unregistered orbital assets moved into low polar orbit, identified only after triangulation of gravimetric anomalies. These were not drones. They were stealth platforms capable of relaying high-intensity pulses directly to the fold site. Someone, somewhere, had realized the significance of Horizon before the world's military and scientific establishment. The stakes had escalated. The multiverse wasn't just a theoretical breakthrough, it was a target. Mira convened an emergency operations council aboard the Ares Dawn. She and Arden reviewed telemetry overlays, noting interference nodes and weak points in the fold's adaptive perimeter. Patel suggested a daring approach. They could exploit temporal resonance to temporarily anchor one segment of the fold, creating a window to insert physical sensors or retrieve data from inside. The method was untested, risky, and could cause feedback sufficient to destabilize the fold entirely. But it was the only option that offered intelligence. The next morning, field teams prepared for insertion. Powered suits had been modified with adaptive energy dampers to compensate for quantum distortion. Drones equipped with phase-disruptive projectiles and sensor jammers would provide overwatch. Mira led the operation, her eyes scanning a live feed of the crater's shifting geometry. Every surface seemed to shimmer, water frozen mid-fall, fractured earth stretching into impossible angles. The team moved carefully, calculating each step, adjusting for sudden shifts in gravity wells created by probability fractures. The insertion began with minimal contact. Drones provided cover, emitting feedback waves designed to disrupt echo interaction. Field units advanced, deploying miniature anchor nodes as Patel instructed. The nodes registered microfluctuations, feeding data back into the carrier's mainframe. Analysis revealed patterns. The fold expanded along predictable resonance modes, responding to energy influx, structural stress, and cognitive presence. Each insertion revealed vulnerabilities, but also unpredictable adaptation. Then, the first casualty occurred. A junior operative disappeared mid-step, absorbed into a transient pocket of the fold. The team froze, calculating the odds of similar events. Mira adjusted tactics, ordering the remaining units to maintain distance while feeding drone recon through overlapping sensor grids. The loss weighed heavily. It was the first direct human cost of interacting with the multiverse. The mission continued, but morale wavered. Every calculated risk now carried existential stakes. Amid these operational strains, internal friction surfaced. Arden clashed repeatedly with command, arguing for preemptive strikes against orbital assets, while political overseers demanded containment and observation only. Communications were slow, approvals bureaucratic. Mira found herself mediating between Arden's pragmatism and the procedural inertia of the chain of command. She realized that survival depended as much on negotiation and timing as on tactical skill or brute force. Meanwhile, Patel identified anomalies in the fold's phase resonance. Certain nodes exhibited echoes of prior human interactions, patterns that suggested memory accumulation or adaptive learning. The fold wasn't static. It was evolving. The team considered the possibility of establishing controlled interaction, using cognitive triggers to probe the fold's limits. They began experimenting with low-intensity signal injections, neural signatures encoded in ultra-high-frequency light pulses. The responses were subtle, phasing echoes that mirrored intent without immediate threat. Field teams prepared for deeper insertion, using anchor nodes to extend the reach into the fold. Each operation revealed more about its structure, probability membranes layered like crystalline lattices, fluctuating between relative stability and chaotic collapse. Mira noted that the fold's growth patterns correlated with energy input, human presence, and orbital perturbations. Each new insight offered tactical leverage, but also amplified risk. A single miscalculation could trigger catastrophic feedback, undoing months of stabilization work. Days passed. Skirmishes with phasing echoes became more frequent. The team realized these entities were not aggressive in a conventional sense. They reacted to stimuli, probing defenses, testing boundaries. Yet their movements suggested problem-solving capacity, an ability to exploit weaknesses in containment strategy. Mira ordered changes in patrol patterns and drone deployment, emphasizing asymmetry and unpredictability to counter adaptive entities. It was a lesson learned under fire. Conventional tactics failed against phenomena that evolved faster than predictive algorithms could account for. Political ramifications escalated as new intelligence arrived. Covert monitoring indicated multiple nations had dispatched stealth reconnaissance satellites toward the site. Global Command feared that Horizon's breakthrough could spark an international crisis, or even trigger armed confrontation. Arden's voice, transmitted through intermittent bursts, urged immediate action. Delay was no longer an option. The fold's growth, combined with orbital interference, risked destabilizing not only the site, but the surrounding continental crust. In response, Mira authorized a high-risk operation. Using phase-dampening shields and adaptive energy fields, field units advanced to the inner rim of the crater. Each step was a calculation of energy, feedback, gravitational distortion, and echo behavior. They established temporary relay nodes to transmit telemetry, allowing Patel and other analysts aboard the Ares Dawn to monitor fluctuations in real time. Every insertion yielded valuable data: shifts in probability density, minor structural collapses within the fold, and hints of potential communication vectors with the echo entities. During one critical operation, a fold segment collapsed unexpectedly, swallowing a relay node and several drones. The resulting feedback created a small temporal distortion, briefly looping time within a local area. Field units experienced déjà vu and spatial disorientation. Mira adjusted the deployment algorithm, introducing asynchronous timing offsets to counter feedback loops. These improvised tactics reduced loss, but highlighted a chilling reality. The fold could not be fully predicted, and every advancement carried escalating human and material cost. By the end of the week, the team had made progress. They established partial stabilization of one fold segment and retrieved preliminary data streams. The intelligence revealed potential pathways to control fold expansion, but only if human operators could manipulate resonance patterns with precision. This required unprecedented coordination between cognitive input, field deployment, and adaptive AI modulation. Each variable carried mortal risk. Failure could create local collapse zones or temporal anomalies extending across kilometers. And yet, amidst the careful victories, a deeper unease emerged. Patel's analysis indicated that the fold was beginning to respond autonomously to strategic patterns. The echoes were no longer merely reactive, they were adaptive. They anticipated patrol routes, manipulated sensor arrays, and even altered phase feedback to confuse operators. Mira realized the fold was no longer a passive phenomenon. It was learning, assessing, and potentially strategizing. In the final hours of the operation, a new anomaly appeared. A structure materialized within the fold, vaguely architectural yet phasing in and out of solidity. It resonated with an internal frequency identical to the original containment lattice. Mira ordered a cautious approach, drones relaying imagery, sensors recording resonance metrics. Patel hypothesized it was a memory imprint of Horizon itself, a feedback manifestation drawn from prior experiments. Its appearance suggested that the fold could archive and recreate constructs, possibly including consciousness, technology, or both. The operation concluded with mixed results. Field units returned with critical data and several casualties. Drones had been lost or corrupted, and orbital interference remained a looming threat. Yet, they now possessed actionable insight. The fold could be anchored temporarily, guided along predictable resonance paths, and monitored for emergent structures. They had learned at significant cost that control was possible, but tenuous. As the carrier drifted above the crater, Mira gazed down at the strange, blue, glowing residue of the Horizon array. The echoes in the telemetry hinted at intelligence, perhaps sentience. The multiverse was not merely a theory. It had become a tactical entity. Each pulse, each fluctuation, suggested it was watching, learning, and waiting. And somewhere, beyond the fractured reality, Alara Kincaid and Rhys Arden might still be moving within its layers, attempting to manipulate or survive within a domain beyond comprehension. Mira felt the weight of command settle onto her shoulders. The next phase would require daring, coordination, and a willingness to confront phenomena that defied the very laws of physics they relied upon. Failure would not simply mean loss. It would mean that the fold might act, unopposed, to consume, destabilize, or reshape reality itself. The multiverse had awoken, and the human race was scrambling to meet it. The multiverse fold had grown restless. From orbit, the crater appeared calm, a mirror of blue-tinged glass stretching across kilometers. But the telemetry from inserted nodes told a different story. Resonance pulses oscillated unpredictably, nodes phasing in and out of stability, and echoes, those humanoid phantoms of cognitive memory, had multiplied. Each pulse suggested adaptation, each flicker hinted at strategic learning. Mira Solano stared at the data aboard the Ares Dawn, her fingers tracing the loops of fluctuating readings. Every new insight came with an unmistakable urgency. If they didn't act decisively, the fold would shape its own trajectory. Independent of human oversight, Arden's voice came through the comms, distorted but assertive. He had returned in a temporal shuttle, recovered from what seemed to be a sidefold corridor of the collapsed array. His appearance was a shock, haggard, One sleeve burned from exposure to high-energy flux, but eyes blazing with the same relentless determination Mira had seen during the Jakarta operation. "We can't just observe," he said. "They're learning faster than our insertion loops. We have to disrupt their adaptive nodes, intelligently, surgically, before they anticipate all our movements." Patel agreed but warned of the risk. Any aggressive modulation could destabilize the fold beyond repair. Calculations suggested a single misaligned pulse could collapse segments irreversibly, creating temporal voids or probability fractures across a kilometer radius. Mira absorbed the data, weighing attrition, casualty estimates, and system strain. She knew the cost would be high, but the offensive gambit was unavoidable. Field teams deployed in coordinated raids along the crater's perimeter. Each unit moved under heavy sensor cover, using drones with phase disruption projectors that emitted localized interference fields. The fold responded almost immediately. Echoes split and reformed, analyzing patrol patterns and adjusting their phasing to maintain optimal coverage. It became apparent that these were not mindless ghosts. They were tactical entities, capable of adaptive problem-solving and defensive maneuvers. The humans were no longer merely probing. They were engaged in a chess match against an intelligence beyond conventional cognition. The first significant strike came when a relay node, intended to anchor a fold segment for sensor insertion, was overwhelmed. Echoes converged with precise timing, distorting phase space around the node. Energy feedback surged through tethered drones, frying circuitry in a cascading failure. Field units scrambled to recover personnel as the ground beneath them briefly buckled into a transient void. Mira calculated every movement carefully, realizing they had underestimated the fold's capacity for coordinated defense. In response, Arden proposed a high-risk approach, an offensive raid on the outer nodes controlling adaptive feedback. If they could disable these, even temporarily, it would create a window to penetrate the fold's inner lattice. Patel devised a sequence of counter-resonance pulses encoded in layered quantum modulations. These pulses required precise timing, synchronized across drones, field units, and orbital relays, a coordination problem that tested human, machine, and psychic endurance simultaneously. The operation began at dawn. Mira led the insertion, watching her units advance under real-time data overlay. The crater seemed alive, surfaces folding over themselves in impossible geometries, water and soil suspended midair. Nodes glimmered faintly, pulses streaming outward, each echo reacting to the smallest stimuli. Field units deployed microphase disruptors, which produced localized distortions. And for a moment, it worked. Echoes flickered, their patterns chaotic, uncertain. Data streams confirmed temporary stabilization in targeted segments, but the fold adapted quickly. Feedback loops intensified, creating anomalous gravity wells that tugged at exosuits, threatening traction and structural integrity. One operative disappeared entirely, absorbed into a localized pocket of collapsed probability space. The team scrambled, rescuing drones and personnel with calculated risk, but the losses mounted. Mira recorded each casualty meticulously. Every misstep provided insight, every survival tactic refined strategy. By the time the offensive concluded, they had succeeded in temporarily neutralizing 2 outer nodes, but at the cost of 2 field units and 3 drones. Orbital surveillance indicated movement along the polar insertion path. Unknown assets, likely reconnaissance platforms, approached with stealth markers that evaded standard detection. Mira had suspected other powers had noticed the horizon breakthrough. Their appearance confirmed her fears. The multiverse fold was now a theater in a broader contest, and humanity was not the sole player. Arden advocated immediate interception, while Patel emphasized caution. Interference could destabilize the fold at any moment. Mira calculated trajectory and timing. She authorized a controlled intercept, deploying orbital drones equipped with electromagnetic jammers and phase-based disruption pulses. The unknown platforms hesitated, then retreated after sustaining minimal damage, leaving behind traces of anomalous energy. These traces were later identified as foreign quantum signatures, patterns the fold began to absorb, integrate, and mimic. While field and orbital operations continued, the fold began producing structures within its lattice. Crystalline constructs, vaguely architectural, emerged near the central segment. These formations resonated with energy signatures identical to those from the original Horizon Array. Patel hypothesized that the fold was archiving the experiment's history, constructing internal models capable of predictive behavior. Each structure contained multiple layers of probability space, echoing the movements, intentions, and strategies of human operators. The implications were profound. The fold was not only adaptive, but capable of storing knowledge, potentially even consciousness. Mira authorized controlled interaction with these internal structures. Drones equipped with cognitive feedback emitters and reinforced sensor arrays entered the lattice. Each maneuver revealed a fragile balance. The structures could phase out, retracting into probability space when stimulated improperly, or expand violently if targeted too aggressively. Field units adapted by combining manual drone oversight with AI predictive models, guiding the probes through complex geometries. Data recovered from these incursions indicated patterns consistent with memory, tactical evaluation, and even emergent planning. The fold was no longer a passive environment. It was learning, assessing, and strategizing. Meanwhile, the human cost became more evident. Fatigue, stress, and continuous exposure to probability. Fluctuations induced cognitive strain among operators. Temporal disorientation occurred in minor increments, hallucinations aligning with recorded fold events. Mira noted that extended exposure led to psychological adaptation in some personnel, while others suffered permanent neurological damage. Operations required strict rotation schedules, enforced rest, and constant monitoring. Every victory demanded sacrifice, and the team began to internalize that they were playing against a conscious system whose limits were unknowable. Amid this chaos, a betrayal became apparent. A high-ranking analyst within the carrier's command structure had begun transmitting fold data to an unknown recipient. Intercepted signals suggested the information had been encoded to bypass encryption layers, targeting the same orbital assets that had been detected previously. Arden and Mira coordinated a rapid internal investigation, uncovering compromised communication nodes. The revelation shocked the team. The human factor, not the fold, now represented the most immediate threat to mission success. The betrayal delayed planned operations, forced the redeployment of field teams, and introduced additional constraints on resource allocation. Despite these setbacks, offensive gambits continued. Teams targeted the fold's feedback network, aiming to isolate adaptive nodes, map the central lattice, and understand the internal structures. Each operation required precise coordination. Drones moved in layered formations to avoid overlapping resonance. Field units advanced on mapped zones, and orbital relays modulated pulses to prevent feedback overload. The fold's response became increasingly sophisticated. Echoes began predicting patrol routes, manipulating local probability gradients to create misalignments, and sometimes retreating entirely to preserve core structures. Each encounter reinforced the necessity for improvisation and asymmetrical tactics. The breakthrough came during a deep insertion into a stabilized segment. Field units discovered a partially coherent echo, one that mirrored human cognitive signatures but operated within an internal lattice. Patel theorized it was a temporal imprint of Alara Kincaid, captured during the initial collapse. Attempts at communication produced fragmented responses, as if the echo were aware yet incomplete. The realization was chilling. Human consciousness could exist within the fold, adaptive, but constrained by probability mechanics. Mira understood that rescuing or interacting with such imprints carried extraordinary risk. As the operation drew toward its conclusion, telemetry indicated a new structural pattern emerging within the fold's central lattice. It was geometrically precise, radiating outward in layered probability waves. The pattern suggested strategic intent. The fold was preparing a coordinated phase event, potentially to reassert control over destabilized segments or to integrate foreign energy inputs. Arden warned that the event could collapse controlled nodes, absorb field units, and potentially trigger a cascade affecting the surrounding environment. The team prepared defensive measures, reinforcing nodes, recalibrating energy dampers, and preparing rapid extraction protocols. In the final moments, the fold's central lattice pulsed with synchronized resonance, and echoes surged toward stabilized segments. Field units responded with combined drone suppression, phase dampening pulses, and coordinated manual adjustments. Telemetry spiked, nodes faltered, and drones were lost to unpredictable fluctuations. A temporal anomaly expanded briefly, looping several units into recursive probability states. Mira recalibrated manually, sacrificing peripheral nodes to stabilize core zones. By the end of the operation, the team had succeeded in mapping critical fold pathways, disabling adaptive nodes temporarily, and retrieving partial data on emergent structures. But the victory was hollow. Casualties were high, human operators were exhausted, drones destroyed, and the fold had integrated foreign orbital energy, adapting faster than any team had anticipated. Patel noted, the intelligence suggested a strategic learning curve, an entity capable of predicting and countering operations in near real time. Mira understood that the fold's intelligence was now fully emergent, capable of anticipating offensive measures, and that future raids would be exponentially more dangerous. As the Ares dawn drifted above the crater, Mira stared at the shimmer of the fold below. Echoes flickered in irregular patterns. Structures phased in and out of visibility, and telemetry pulses radiated outward, as if communicating across multiple realities. Arden observed silently beside her, hands clasped, calculating the next gambit. The betrayal within their own ranks had left them exposed, and intelligence suggested that other human factions were attempting to co-opt or exploit the fold. The multiverse was no longer merely a phenomenon to study, it was a battlefield. In a private observation chamber, Patel analyzed recovered data. The fold had begun consolidating echo entities, forming adaptive hierarchies, and embedding predictive models into its lattice. Each pulse suggested emergent strategy, potentially capable of directing or manipulating human decision-making. The realization struck all three of them. The fold was learning, evolving, and preparing for interaction at a level they could barely comprehend. Night fell over the Pacific crater. The blue glow of residual energy shimmered like an aurora across fractured glass and fused metal. Mira traced the pulse rhythms with augmented optics, watching echoes stabilize and then dissipate. Somewhere within those phasing entities, Alara Kincaid and Rhys Arden might still exist, or their imprints might be guiding the fold itself. The horizon above remained silent, but the pulse of the multiverse continued, a steady, insistent reminder that the human race was now in a race not only against physics, but against an intelligence beyond the ordinary. And deep within the fold, structures shifted, probability gradients realigned. And for the first time, a coordinated signal emitted outward, patterned, intentional, and unmistakably aware. The multiverse was not waiting. It was preparing. The crater pulsed with a quiet menace beneath the Ares dawn. The fold's blue glowing lattice had expanded beyond the original perimeter, curling and layering upon itself with a complexity that defied conventional physics. Each pulse of energy resonated across multiple probability gradients, sending tremors through the crust and flickers across the ocean's surface. Mira Solano stood at the observation deck, hands pressed to the reinforced glass, eyes scanning the shifting patterns. Every flicker suggested intelligence, strategic, reactive, and observant. The fold was no longer merely a battlefield. It had become a commander. Arden moved behind her, one boot scraping against the steel deck. He had spent days recovering from sidefold displacement exposure, still haunted by brief glimpses of parallel versions of himself, each living divergent outcomes. His return to the fold site had been unannounced, a calculated risk he insisted was necessary. "We don't have the luxury of observation anymore," he said, voice low. "It's organizing. It knows we are limited. Our advantage is timing and coordination. If we strike carefully, we can force it into predictable patterns." Patel, immersed in holographic overlays, traced the emergent lattice structures. "It's adaptive on multiple axes," he said. "When it anticipates physical insertion patterns, energy inputs, even the cognitive signatures of operators. We've been running simulations against yesterday's configuration, but the fold has already evolved beyond them. If we attempt a straightforward raid, we risk annihilation or entrapment in recursive probability loops." He tapped a node on the interface. "We need a multi-vector operation, exploiting both physical and cognitive disruption simultaneously." Mira absorbed the data. The plan was audacious. Split field teams across 3 insertion points simultaneously, each synchronized with orbital relay pulses and drone flares to overload the fold's adaptive capacity. Phase-dampening emitters would anchor temporary nodes, while cognitive feedback sequences would manipulate the fold's emergent intelligence. Success depended on timing measured in milliseconds and coordination across multiple layers of probability. Failure meant the annihilation of field units or uncontrolled fold expansion. Every operator understood the stakes. Deployment began at first light. Field units descended toward the crater in armored insertion pods, guided by live telemetry. The fold had shifted since the last operation, its surfaces folding in upon themselves, rivers of molten metal suspended midair, echo figures phasing across unstable terrain. Mira's voice was calm in the comms, each directive precise, every team synchronized to the second. Drones led the advance, emitting pulse sequences designed to interfere with adaptive echoes. Temporary nodes deployed into the lattice held for seconds, long enough to allow reconnaissance into internal fold structures. Echoes reacted immediately. Units reported humanoid forms emerging from the lattice, mirroring movements, anticipating routes, phasing around nodes. The fold's intelligence was testing boundaries, probing for weakness. Field units adapted, splitting into asymmetrical patterns, changing paths in real time, feeding cognitive triggers to drone systems to exploit brief lapses in echo response. The operation became a dance of anticipation and countermeasure, each side reacting faster than the last could calculate. At the central lattice, the fold had begun constructing crystalline nodes that pulsed with coherent energy. Arden suggested targeting these directly, theorizing they served as command hubs for echo coordination. Mira hesitated. Direct assault risked triggering chain collapse across all 3 vectors. Patel calculated alternative routes, exploiting subtle frequency gradients to desynchronize the nodes temporarily. The decision was made to risk a partial neutralization, sacrificing peripheral nodes to preserve the core lattice and maintain control over insertion pathways. The first casualties occurred swiftly. A side vector team vanished into an unsteady fold pocket, absorbed into probability turbulence. Drone feedback indicated looping temporal anomalies within the lattice, displacing units into recursive iterations of their own movements. Command nodes triggered counter-resonance waves, destabilizing local energy fields. Mira adjusted on the fly, rerouting remaining units and deploying emergency pulse dampeners. Arden personally directed a rescue sequence, guiding a squad through a corridor of collapsed reality, retrieving personnel with minimal loss. The cost, however, was permanent. 1 operator suffered neurological collapse, and 2 drones were permanently phased out. Simultaneously, Patel's cognitive feedback sequences interfaced with the fold's emergent echo patterns. Initially, the fold resisted, redirecting energy pulses to counteract manipulation. But over hours of careful modulation, operators observed a subtle change. Echoes hesitated. Movement patterns became less synchronized, and certain internal nodes began fluctuating in response to human cognitive input. It was proof that strategic thought, applied with precision, could influence the fold's behavior. Then the fold struck back in a manner no one anticipated. Within the central lattice, a composite echo emerged, a humanoid figure larger than any previous encounter, composed of multiple overlapping imprints. Its movements were deliberate, intelligent, and predictive. It began rearranging nodes, consolidating energy reserves, and emitting resonant pulses that interfered with both drones and human neural signals. The team recognized immediately that they were facing the fold's first coordinated counteroffensive. Arden recalculated insertion patterns. "We'll need to bait it," he said. "Force it to commit resources to one vector while we exploit another." Mira agreed, issuing simultaneous commands across all teams. Units split and feigned retreat along predictable paths, drawing the composite echo into expendable zones. Then, exploiting the temporary gaps in resonance alignment, central nodes were attacked with synchronized pulse sequences. The fold responded violently, fracturing reality locally, energy spiking beyond prior thresholds. Temporary corridors folded outward, and for the first time the structure recoiled, consolidating energy defensively. The decisive moment arrived when a field unit detected a semi-stable cognitive imprint deep within the lattice. Patel identified it as a possible remnant of Alara Kincaid, a conscious echo retained from the initial collapse. Direct interaction risked destabilizing her imprint, but it also offered a unique opportunity. If leveraged, the imprint could guide operators through the lattice, revealing weak points in the fold's emergent structure. Arden authorized the approach. Mira's team advanced, nodes and drones in precise coordination, navigating corridors of phased reality to reach the imprint. As they neared, the imprint responded, sending feedback patterns that mirrored their own movements, guiding them past unstable zones and collapsing probability pockets. Every step was tense. One misaligned pulse could annihilate the unit or collapse sections of the fold. Operators relied on a combination of cognitive feedback, real-time modulation, and split-second decision-making. The lattice shifted around them, crystalline walls folding like origami, echo figures skirting edges. Yet the imprint provided a path. Reaching the core of the fold, they deployed synchronized dampeners and cognitive anchors. The central node pulsed violently, energy radiating outward as if resisting external influence. Mira watched as the composite echo recoiled, dispersing into multiple subordinate echoes. Patel confirmed through telemetry. Resonance alignment was temporarily achieved, giving operators a window to insert advanced scanning arrays, extract data, and partially stabilize critical nodes. But the victory demanded sacrifice. Arden, recognizing a feedback surge threatening to phase entire insertion vectors, manually synchronized a dampener with the fold's primary resonance. The energy discharged violently, knocking him unconscious and overloading his neural interface. Field units evacuated under emergency protocols, and drones were sacrificed to maintain temporary lattice stability. The central lattice stabilized, but only marginally. Arden survived, but the physical and neurological cost was severe. As operators regrouped, Patel transmitted analysis. The fold had begun integrating all external inputs into its emergent intelligence. Every strike, every maneuver, every cognitive intervention was now part of its learning matrix. The fold was becoming more sophisticated, capable of anticipating human strategy faster than any predictive algorithm. Yet, the partial stabilization demonstrated that coordinated multi-vector operations, combined with cognitive anchoring, could manipulate its behavior, albeit at tremendous risk. The human cost was undeniable. 2 field units remained in temporal suspension within the lattice, and several others suffered permanent cognitive impairment. Drones were irrecoverable, and energy reserves on the carrier were strained to operational limits. Mira and Arden convened a quiet assessment. A victory had been achieved, but it was incomplete. The fold had not been defeated. It had been temporarily constrained. An intelligence gained through sacrifice offered a path forward. As night fell over the crater, the fold's lattice shimmered in complex patterns, phasing and pulsing with emergent intelligence. Operators aboard the Ares Dawn noted subtle changes. Echoes observed at greater distance, new structures forming within the lattice, and resonance patterns suggesting predictive modeling of human behavior. The imprint of Alara Kincaid remained partially coherent, a guide and a warning. Mira gazed down at the fold, exhausted but resolute. They had proven that human ingenuity, coordination, and sacrifice could influence the multiverse fold, even as it learned, adapted, and evolved. The battle was far from over. The fold was alive, intelligent, and capable of countermeasures beyond conventional understanding. The next phase would require even greater risk, deeper coordination, and the willingness to confront consequences that no human had yet faced. And deep within the fold, the composite echoes pulsed, shifting nodes with deliberate precision, analyzing the human interventions, preparing for the inevitable next engagement. The multiverse was aware. It was calculating. It was waiting. The Ares Dawn orbited above the Pacific crater like a sentinel poised on the edge of the impossible. Mira Solano stood in the command center, eyes fixed on the fold below. Blue glowing filaments wove across the crater, layers of probability twisting like living architecture. The lattice pulsed in response to telemetry feedback, each resonance spike a heartbeat of an intelligence they could neither predict nor fully understand. Every node, every echo, every crystalline structure radiated potential danger and opportunity. The time for cautious probing had ended. Arden, recovering slowly from the neurological trauma of the previous operation, was now present in the control loop. His cognitive interface stabilized through emergency neural damping and layered AI mediation. He studied the lattice with a mixture of awe and calculated urgency. "This is it," he said. "We either force its adaptive nodes into a coordinated collapse, or we risk it reaching emergent self-stabilization beyond human influence. Timing, coordination, and precision, every second counts. There's no margin for error." Patel, seated at a holographic display, overlaid previous node disruptions with cognitive feedback sequences and insertion patterns. "I've calculated optimal multi-vector insertion windows. The fold will resist, but the anchors we've developed can impose temporary stability. We can influence the central lattice long enough to retrieve data, secure Alara's imprint fully, and prevent further adaptive expansion, if we execute perfectly." He tapped a node, and the display flared with dynamic resonance lines tracing potential paths. But every pulse, every drone, every operator exposed adds to the risk. Failures could cascade through probability space and trap us within recursive folds. Mira nodded, understanding the calculus of sacrifice. The team had rehearsed extensively, but simulation could not account for the fold's emergent intelligence or the echo's increasingly strategic responses. She issued final commands to the field units, split into 4 vectors, coordinate through phased relay nodes, deploy cognitive dampeners, and anchor temporary nodes in precise synchrony. Each operator's path was calculated to millisecond precision, drones acting as both shields and probes. Every team member understood that deviation could mean annihilation. Insertion began at first light. Pods descended into the crater, the fold surfaces phasing unpredictably, rivers of molten metal suspended mid-air, crystalline structures folding and unfolding like living origami. Echoes moved in deliberate patterns, appearing and disappearing along anticipated vectors. Field units advanced cautiously, deploying phase-dampening emitters and anchor nodes, carefully guiding drones along asymmetric flight paths to avoid overloading resonance fields. The lattice reacted immediately, a shifting, undulating network of intelligence, testing, probing, and adjusting. At the central lattice, composite echoes coalesced into humanoid forms, larger and more coherent than any previously encountered. They were composed of multiple imprints, including faint traces of human cognitive signatures. One, more distinct than the others, carried recognizable patterns. Alara Kincaid's neural imprint, stabilized but incomplete. Patel interfaced remotely, calibrating cognitive pulses to interact with the imprint, using it as a guide through the folding pathways. The imprint responded, leading field units past unstable corridors, collapsing probability pockets, and providing real-time guidance toward the fold's core nodes. The first escalation came when a side vector encountered a newly emergent lattice structure, crystalline towers resonating with overlapping frequency patterns. Attempts at direct disruption triggered cascading feedback, threatening to phase the entire insertion zone. Mira redirected units, sacrificing peripheral drones to stabilize the corridor. Arden manually synchronized dampeners, channeling energy through his neural interface to prevent collapse. The surge left him staggering, consciousness flickering, but the core lattice remained intact. Field units advanced, adjusting dynamically to shifting pathways, feedback loops, and echo responses. Patel calculated that the fold's central nodes were approaching maximum coherence, integrating all prior human intervention into predictive matrices. Any misalignment could trigger uncontrollable probability collapse, not just in the crater, but extending outward across the regional probability field. Mira ordered a temporary halt, allowing drones and human operators to recalibrate. The fold pulsed, almost imperceptibly, as if aware of the pause and testing for continued presence. With coordination restored, insertion resumed. Operators followed the imprint deeper into the lattice. The central crystalline structure radiated pulsing energy, resonating across multiple probability layers. Cognitive feedback sequences were intensified, designed to destabilize the adaptive eco-hierarchy without destroying the imprint. Field units deployed microphase anchors, synchronized with orbital relay pulses, creating pockets of temporary stability within the core lattice. The fold reacted violently, phasing and collapsing sections, but each surge was absorbed through careful timing and energy modulation. As the team approached the core node, the composite echo initiated a direct countermeasure. A wave of phased energy enveloped the area, destabilizing peripheral nodes and inducing temporal recursion within field units. Operators experienced looping moments, seeing repeated versions of themselves performing identical actions. Mira recalibrated node pulses, manually adjusting frequencies to counteract the recursive loops. Arden, despite weakened neural capacity, guided units through cognitive signaling, preventing temporal entrapment. Drones were sacrificed in controlled bursts to absorb energy surges, allowing human operators to advance. At last, the imprint stabilized near the central node. Patel interfaced remotely, encoding quantum resonance stabilizers into the node lattice while the field team anchored the imprint. The composite echo recoiled, phasing into multiple subordinate layers, and the lattice pulsed violently before partially consolidating. Temporary stability was achieved, giving operators a narrow window to extract data, analyze adaptive structures, and secure the imprint fully. Mira issued final extraction orders. Units moved in synchronized fashion, deploying phased exit nodes and pulling drones back sequentially to avoid energy spikes. The Fold reacted, attempting to absorb the extraction vectors, but its adaptive capacity was momentarily exceeded. Feedback pulses indicated partial suppression of central node coordination, allowing field units to retreat safely, though not without cost. 2 operators remained in recursive probability pockets, lost for the moment, and several drones were permanently phased out. Arden, staggering but alive, guided the retreat, relying on neural damping and layered AI mediation. Once aboard the Ares Dawn, the team assessed results. The Fold's central lattice had been influenced successfully. Adaptive nodes had been temporarily constrained, data recovered, and Alara Kincaid's imprint stabilized. Telemetry suggested the Fold would require hours to reintegrate and adapt, providing a window to reinforce nodes and monitor emergent behavior. The cost was steep: personnel losses, drone attrition, and neural strain across operators. Yet, the mission had proven that coordinated, disciplined human effort, combined with sacrifice and tactical ingenuity, could influence an intelligence operating across multiple probability layers. Patel analyzed extracted data. The Fold's internal architecture and resonance patterns were now partially understood. Algorithms were developed to predict adaptive responses for limited durations, providing a framework for future operations. Cognitive imprints could be stabilized, guiding operators through otherwise lethal zones. Emergent structures within the Fold could be influenced using synchronized multi-vector operations, anchoring probability fluctuations to prevent catastrophic expansion. Mira convened a final assessment with Arden and Patel. "We've won this round," she said, voice measured. "But the Fold is still alive. It's still learning. And we've seen now that human ingenuity, our coordination, timing, and willingness to sacrifice, can influence outcomes. That's our doctrine going forward. Discipline over convenience, coordination over brute force, observation over assumption." Arden nodded, still recovering, the weight of the past operations evident in every movement. Patel, exhausted but focused, confirmed that the data offered both hope and caution. The multiverse Fold could be engaged successfully, but only through continued vigilance, careful planning, and understanding of emergent intelligence. As night settled over the crater, the lattice shimmered with residual energy. Composite echoes phased in and out, but none approached the stability or cohesion of the central node. Alara Kincaid's imprint remained partially coherent, a reminder of human presence within the Fold. Field units monitored peripheral nodes, deploying continuous cognitive and phase modulation to maintain temporary stability. The Ares Dawn remained in orbit, sentinel over a reality that had proven both fragile and extraordinarily complex. Mira gazed down at the blue glowing lattice, reflecting on the costs, the lost operators, the sacrificed drones, the temporary neurological damage, and the moral weight of commanding a team through phenomena that defied comprehension. She understood the lesson imprinted across every pulse, every echo, every collapse. Human survival, mastery, and influence were not guaranteed by superior firepower or technology alone, but by coordination, discipline, and the courage to act where others hesitated. Beyond the crater, faint anomalies flickered across regional space, remnants of integrated orbital energy and adaptive intelligence from prior incursions. Patel noted that these signals suggested continued evolution, small, calculated adjustments by the Fold to integrate external intelligence. They were not dormant. They were observing, preparing for subsequent interactions, and anticipating human strategy. Mira's final log entry concluded the multiverse Fold had been influenced, its adaptive intelligence temporarily constrained, and emergent imprints stabilized. Human operators had proven capable of strategic influence through coordination, discipline, and sacrifice. The costs were significant, but the doctrine established during these operations, multi-vector coordination, cognitive anchoring, and measured risk, would guide future engagement. The multiverse Fold remained alive, aware, and learning, but humanity had proven it could act decisively, adapt, and endure. And as the Ares Dawn drifted in silent orbit above the crater, the Fold pulsed, blue and vibrant, a living, intelligent system interacting with human observers across dimensions. The battle had been fought, the stakes clear, and the outcome uncertain, but humanity had shown its capacity to confront the unimaginable, to endure, and to act with intelligence, discipline, and courage. The multiverse was awake, but so too were the humans, who had learned to navigate its perilous, radiant complexity.